the United States and North Korea would be catastrophic.
My portfolio, my mission, my responsibility is to have military options should they be needed. However, right now, Secretary Tillerson, Ambassador Haley, you can see the American effort is diplomatically led. It has diplomatic traction. It is gaining diplomatic results. And I want to stay right there, right now. The tragedy of war is well enough known. It doesn't need another characterization beyond the fact that it would be catastrophic.
Mattis added that the U.S. is doing whatever it can to get the situation under control. The Pentagon chief said the U.S. is trying to make its military more lethal and capable of defending. Mattis reiterated that Washington is ready for any confrontation with Pyongyang. Meanwhile, the U.S. President Donald Trump has issued fresh warnings to North Korea, saying its previous comments may have been too soft.
They've been doing this to our country for a long time, for many years. And it's about time that somebody stuck up for the people of this country and for the people of other countries. So, if anything, maybe that statement wasn't tough enough. And we're backed by 100% by our military. We're backed by everybody.
Well, Donald Trump says Pyongyang should be extremely nervous if it is considering an invasion of the United States or its allies. He also urged China to step up its efforts to rein in Pyongyang and its nuclear program. The fiery rhetoric has sent U.S. stocks down to their lowest in nearly 3 months. Trump had earlier threatened that Pyongyang would face fire and fury if it continued making threats against the United States. Joining us via Skype from Beijing is Einar Tangen. He's a political analyst. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Tangen. Now, is there a discrepancy or incoherency when it comes to the U.S. policy vis-a-vis North Korea? You have Trump on the one hand talking about fire and fury, but then you have Secretary Tillerson and also Mattis toning down the war rhetoric.
Well, quite obviously, the only adults in the room are not Donald Trump. It's very clear that he's pursuing some sort of, populist campaign. I don't think it's working. I think the rest of the world and the financial world and everybody else is thinking anew that he is not qualified to be holding that office. These are not the kind of comments that one makes when one is trying to get traction. The issue here is that North Korea needs to be resolved, but it's not going to be resolved without China, Russia, and South Korea, and Japan. This kind of needless warmongering type of talk is more better suited to a playground bully. It's hard to believe that the President of the United States has engaged in these things. It undercuts his administration's desire and efforts to try to settle this thing in a peaceful way. You heard Mattis's comments very clearly. He's trying to diffuse the situation. He understands what war is. Obviously, Donald Trump doesn't.
Right, but Mr. Tangen, despite being able to brush off comments of Donald Trump as a schoolyard bully, his comments do play a huge role on how the tensions escalate or diffuse in the Korean Peninsula.
Part of all of this, here you have the President of the United States, supposedly backed by people who have an understanding of the situation, the skills to try to diffuse it, or at least some of the skills to diffuse it, and he's undercutting them. There's no from what he's saying, and this is what is difficult for not only the world, but the majority of Americans to understand. His polls have
Well, it seems we're having some technical difficulties there with Mr. Tangen. We'll try and get him back on for you. That was Einar Tangen, political analyst, joining us via Skype from Beijing.
Beijing will stop U.S. from toppling North Korea regime, Chinese mouthpiece says. China will stop any attempts to topple tubby North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un from power, according to a Beijing-run newspaper. The shocking statement was made shortly after U.S. President Donald Trump ratcheted up rhetoric toward the North Korean Supremo after it threatened to launch missiles at Guam, an American island in the Pacific. The widely read state-run Global Times, published by China's ruling Communist Party, is often used by the regime as a mouthpiece to broadcast statements. In an editorial it said Beijing is not able to persuade either Washington or Pyongyang to back down. It read, "It needs to make clear its stance to all sides and make them understand that when their actions jeopardize China's interests, China will respond with a firm hand. If the US and South Korea carry out strikes and try to overthrow the North Korean regime and change the political pattern of the Korean peninsula, China will prevent them from doing so. China should also make it clear that if North Korea launches missiles that threaten US soil first and the US retaliates, China will stay neutral. North Korea's only ally is concerned that a conflict on the peninsula could unleash a wave of destabilizing refugees into its northeast. It is also worried that the two Korean nations could end up being reunified and ally itself to the US. China views the North as a useful buffer state that hold America's allies at bay." The Global Times added, "China will firmly resist any side which wants to change the status quo of the areas where China's interests reconcile